What's up YouTube? Today we are back in Synthmaster 3 and I want to show you a couple of techniques for making really big cinematic patches that are made up of several different layers. So there's a couple of things in Synthmaster 3 that make it really cool for creating drum layers accompanied by all sorts of pads and that kind of thing. And I really like using these kinds of tools for creating intros and that kind of thing because it allows me to kind of sketch out a kind of intro and encapsulate almost like an entire cinematic arrangement or an entire piece of music for the intro just in a single preset. And then I can load it in a couple of different projects and kind of see where it fits, you know. So I really like doing this kind of workflow with these kinds of tools. And I'm going to show you a couple of really cool things inside Synthmaster that make it really cool for this kind of thing. So full disclosure, this is a sponsored video. However, this is more of a tutorial than a promotional piece. So I'm just going to go through how to actually use this stuff, and it's up to you whether you feel like it's going to fit into your workflow. Anyway, with that being said, let's dive in and have a look. So firstly, let's go ahead and initialize the preset. We can click over here and just click initialize. And the first thing that I want to talk about today is the drum sequencing. So inside Synthmaster 3, there's a really cool technique that we can use where we can split up several different layers, but then sequence them from a single window. So let's say, for example, I'm just going to name this layer drum 1, and we can load up a sample in there. And just straight away, I'm going to set this to one shot, turn the release and the decay up just so that I hear the full sample when I hit the trigger. And then here what we can do is we can immediately just go and say add a new layer, or we can actually just remove this and say duplicate drum 1, and then we can call this drum 2. So that's going to keep all those settings like the one shot and the envelopes intact. And then here we can just drag in a different sample. So what I'm going to do here is just duplicate this a couple of times till we have like 4 or 5 different layers that each have a different sample loaded up. Cool. So now on each of these layers, we can go into the sequencer section over here. We can enable it, and then we can set this to drum part. And if we just go, we should have actually done this before we duplicated them, but that's okay. And so now what this allows us to do is open up this editor window. And as you can see here, it's basically given us all 5 of those drum layers with a kind of piano roll where we have the ability to actually edit all of the steps. So we can go and create like a lot more, much easier create these kind of more complex drum rhythms using multiple layers. You're not necessarily limited to just drum samples. You can load up or you can create your own synth sounds or synth drum hits and then set them to sequence a drum part like this as well, which is really, really cool. We can also have several different patterns. So here, if we say new pattern, we can actually cycle between the different patterns like this. So here we can just do like 1, 2. Something like that. And then we can cycle between them. And we can assign a particular octave here to actually switch between the different patterns. I'm not going to do that though, because we're creating a little bit more of a complex patch. I don't want to kind of lock in particular octaves for that kind of thing. We can also go over here to the mix view where we have the ability to actually mix, like with a mixer, like all of these different individual layers. And we can actually create send effects as well. So if we go effects bus, we can say create like a chorus and reverb here. And then maybe a delay on this one. Let's just effects mix 100%. So like I said, we can also combine this with synthesis layers if we're creating like drum synths. We can also combine this with like something like what could work here is like a sort of synth pulse kind of sound. So let's say add new layer. And with this one, we can say solo, just so we're just hearing this layer on its own. And then with this one, what we can do is we can create an envelope over here. Let's say ADSR. And then with this one, we can assign it to the frequency. Okay, so I actually went in and in each of these editors, I set the key track for the drums to 0%. And so any key that we press, it's not going to affect the drum tracks. It'll only affect the synth tracks. And this is another really, really cool kind of technique for creating these kind of layered sounds where we can have the drum layers kind of just playing a sequence and it doesn't matter what key they're in. And then we can kind of just play layers of leads on top that are also kind of sequenced, or we can solo them. And you can choose here, for example, in this layer section, we can say set the keyboard zone. So if we want to have like just the lower half of a keyboard doing a kind of pad or drone and the upper part doing a lead, we can kind of set it up that way as well. Really, really cool. So anyway, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add another layer here and we're going to solo it while we create a kind of synth pluck. And so here, what we can do is we can set this to an ADSR and we can assign the output of this to the frequency. And now let's turn the sustain down. So we're just getting a pluck like this. And so with this one, we can actually set it also to the drum part and then open it up. And then we can actually do rhythms here if we wanted to. But with this one, I think I'm just going to leave it the static kind of. I'm going to leave it at the static rhythm because we do want that kind of more, just like a pulse, like a low synth pulse. We can actually turn the pitch down a little bit as well here. Let's maybe do 2 or 3 octaves. Let's see what suits best. That's sounding pretty cool. So with layers like this, I like to set them to monophonic, just so that they don't trigger chords and that kind of thing. It'll just keep playing that kind of low drone depending on what notes we hit. And then we could add another layer on top to do like a higher lead sound or like a pad sound or something like that. And so I think in this context, a pad might be really cool. But we can actually just go ahead and load up the flute sound, which we made in one of the previous examples, that multi-sample patch, and just maybe add like some reverb and stuff to that and see how we go with that. Here, what I'm going to do is just rename this to Synth Pulse. So like I said, with this one, what we can do is we can actually load one of the multi-samples which we created in one of the previous episodes. When we create a new layer, it will add a filter. And in this example, we don't want that because we've got this sample already loaded. But then here with this one, what we can do is maybe just add a bunch of effects directly onto the layer. And then maybe we can just add one last sort of simple synth layer. Here, let's set monophonic. Let's put on glide. So it kind of glides between the notes like that. And then here we can maybe add something like an LFO to that frequency. And then maybe like another LFO to the speed of this LFO. Do you know what I mean? Like this. I want to set this to not reset. So we can say trigger random. And so it's going to choose a random spot every time the note is triggered. So I quickly want to talk about the voice modifier system. And so this is designed to make things sound a bit more analog, and it works really, really well with unison sounds. Polyphonic sounds as well, but this particular one is monophonic. So let's just create a couple of voices, like let's say 8 voices here. Turn the volume down just so it's not incredibly loud. If we turn the vintage up and then right click and say edit voice modifiers, each of the voices will have its own individual settings here. And so what we want to do now is go to voices and say like pan spread. And then just spread all of these out a little bit. And maybe give it some drift as well. So you can really hear that difference when you kind of, especially with a unison sound, but when you turn this on and off. And you can actually edit each voice individually over here, like panning, volume, fine tune, phase, etc. And it's not just for the oscillators. You've actually got voice modifiers for the envelopes. You've got voice modifiers for the filters, so you can choose cutoff and resonance differentials for each voice with the different envelopes and everything. So you can get really, really specific and kind of really model specific kind of analog synths and that kind of thing. But for this, I'm just going to apply some of the default settings just to give us some of that kind of variation, and then some effects. With this one, we can actually just use the effects from the mix view. The buses over here, we can just add these. Let's maybe turn the pitch up on this one. Let's say maybe 2 octaves, just so it's sitting above. Maybe just 1 octave. And see, the cool thing about this now is we can quickly just change the context and fit it into like a different track that we're working on. Say, for example, we want at like a different tempo. Let's go like a bit slower, and let's change the key. Let's just change the key over here. Transpose the incoming MIDI. And now it's like, it's a different track. Do you know what I mean? Cool. I think that's about it for today. Let me know what you think in the comments. And if you haven't yet, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing to the channel. I'll see you guys next time. Cheers.